Hi, my name is Ian Ely, but enough about me. Let's talk about Greg Mankiw. Mankiw's a pretty cool dude, but you know what's even cooler? It's what he did. Follow me. This is kind of spooky. Oh yeah, that's right, we were talking about Mankiw. This is Mankiw's textbook, which he wrote in 1997 when he was offered $1.4 million to do so. That's about 3 times more than any textbook author is offered to write it. Yeah, talk about responding to incentives. You get it? Because in this book, Mankiw introduced the 10 principles of economics, which is what I'm going to be going over in this video. Principle number 1. People face trade-offs. Hi, we're in a different place now, but let's focus on economics. The basic principle of a trade-off is to have more of one thing, you have to be willing to have less of another. Yeah, life sucks. Making this video, I'm making a trade-off. To have a really polished, nice video with a 101% on Rotten Tomatoes, it requires a lot of filming and editing, which eats into my sleep schedule, therefore impacting my sanity. So I'm giving up my sanity to increase the quality of the video. Isn't that right, Ian the editor? Principle number 2. The cost of something is what you give up to get it. Principle number 2 builds off of the last principle. This is where opportunity cost comes in. Opportunity cost is essentially what must be given up to get something else. For example, let's say that you wanted to buy some new music. You've narrowed it down between 2 different movie soundtracks, the entire Indiana Jones soundtrack and the entire Alvin and the Chipmunks soundtrack. Let's say that you only have a budget of $50. You have to pay $44.46 for the entire Alvin and the Chipmunks movie soundtrack collection. Or you have to pay $41.96 for the entire Indiana Jones collection. The opportunity cost here would be, to get one, you have to give up the other. So, based on the price, the Indiana Jones collection would actually be less than the Alvin and the Chipmunks collection. Oh. You're still not convinced? To buy the Alvin and the Chipmunks collection, it's not only more money, but you also have to give up your dignity and the right to your immortal soul. In this case, the opportunity cost is even less for the Indiana Jones soundtrack compared to the Alvin and the Chipmunks soundtrack. And why would you even want the Alvin and the Chipmunks soundtrack? Why? Principle number 3, rational people think at the margin. First, let's break this down into 2 different vocab words. The first one being rational. The term rational simply means someone who tries their best to achieve their goals. The other word here is margin, which simply is
the edge.
So people who think at the margin are people who think close to the edge of the actions that they are currently taking. If something prompts you to make an adjustment to your current action, this principle implies that rational people will make marginal changes to achieve that goal. You know what? We'll even substitute the word marginal with the word incremental. Let's put that into the real world now. For example, let's consider putting money into a savings account. If I create a savings account, never putting any money into it whatsoever at any point of time, I'm not thinking at the margin. Neither will taking all my money I will ever make and depositing it into the account be thinking at the margin. Instead, depositing small percentages of your income into the savings account over time would be an example of thinking at the margin. Why? Because instead of the extremes of the first 2, the last one represents an incremental change in my course of action by incrementally adding more money into the account over time. Oh, hello there. Principle number 4, people respond to incentives. In other words, incentives are another way of getting people to rethink trade-offs. For example, if a company wants me to take their survey to review their product, I'd probably say, ugh, capitalism sucks, because I'm not going to give up my time so that their company can harvest my data. On the other hand, if a company wanted me to take their survey and I had the chance to win a $50 Visa gift card, I'd probably say, heck yeah, capitalism's amazing. In this example, offering the chance to win a $50 Visa gift card raised the possible benefits of me taking the survey, therefore making me rethink my decision. Principle 5, trade can make everyone better off. Trade is the action of giving goods and services to someone else for goods and services or money in return. Goods and services are pretty self-explanatory. A good is something that you can buy, for example, a table, a bag of coffee, or here in America, a good old AR-15. A service, on the other hand, is something that you can pay someone to do, such as mow your lawn, do your taxes, or have someone do that tooth extraction that you've really been needing. The reason it's said that trade can make everyone better off is it can allow us to trade for something that we need and another party has for something that we have and another party needs. Take, for example, my friend Harry. Yesterday, he broke his leg. In the past, I've also broken my leg, but now it's healed. But I have a pair of crutches lying around my house that I no longer need. But when I was writing the script for this film, I really hurt my wrists. But Harry, on the other hand, used to have really bad carpal tunnel syndrome. Now it's better, but he still has that wrist brace lying around. Logically, I would trade my crutches for his wrist brace, so he can have the crutches so that he can actually walk, and I can have the wrist brace so I can continue writing films. See ya, Harry! Oh, Harry, watch out for the truck! Well, it's in cases like these that we emphasize the can, and trade can make everyone better off, because the trade was going really well until Harry got flattened by a semi. So in that case, the trade isn't going too well for him. Also, for example, you could trade a popsicle stick for a Lamborghini. In that case, trade probably isn't making everyone better off unless you really, really like popsicle sticks. Principle 6. Markets are usually a good way to organize economic activity. Basically, this principle shows how salty Mankiw is towards the idea of a command economy, which is where the government controls the production of goods and services and how much people make. This is the type of economy that the USSR utilized. Mankiw makes the point in this principle that a market economy, an economy where decisions about the economy, the production of goods and services, and their prices are determined by thousands of citizens and businesses, is a good way to organize economic activity. Here's an example. Take the ice cream market. In a command economy, the ice cream market is probably only made up of one or a couple of brands of ice cream that the government produces. The government also controls how much is made and distributed and the price of the ice cream. No more at joy in a cup. But in a market economy, the market is mostly driven by transactions between citizens and corporations that aren't run by the government. So there can be as many ice cream companies as people want to start. And the prices are determined by supply and demand. People buy what they want and or need based on their income, and there's also this idea of free will of what people can buy. The ultimate proof of this principle is that many of the countries utilizing this command economy have either fallen apart, switched over to a market economy, or have a horrible standard of living, which we'll get to later. While countries such as the US have a relatively more stable economy. Principle number 7, governments can sometimes improve market outcomes. You know, sometimes it's fun to take a little break from economics, you know? Take a little moment to relax or have a little cup of coffee. Psych. Economics should be on your mind 24/7. You should never stop thinking about it. You should always think about how you can dedicate your life to it. You should never, ever stop thinking. It should haunt your days and your nights. It should haunt your dreams. Okay, now that we're done with that, we can move on to principle number 7. You know, capitalism is great and all, but sometimes governments need to step in to prevent things like market failure or corporate abuse. One of the things that our government can step in to help prevent are negative externalities. A negative externality is when a bystander or third party is negatively impacted by a transaction between other parties. So, for example, when a massive industrial plant starts spewing out pollutants into the air, not only does it affect the entire world at large, but also the neighborhood right next to it. Or, for example, the sales of guns and ammunition in the US leads to around 36,000 deaths each year related to gun violence. One good example of the US government stepping in to prevent negative externalities was with the creation of the Meat Inspection Act and the Pure Food and Drug Act back in the early 1900s. This was in response to the horrific and deadly conditions of the industrial meatpacking facilities during the Second Industrial Revolution. Some of the horrible things that occurred at these plants were, for example, immigrant workers getting little to no pay, finding rotting meat, rats, and excrement in your meat when you bought it, and also accounts of people falling into meat grinders, which probably isn't too pleasant. The government in this case stepped in and created these acts to prevent these negative externalities that were occurring from the meat packaging facilities. Principle number 8. A country's standard of living depends on its ability to produce goods and services. As a fair warning, this one's going to get a little bit lengthy. Now we're moving on to the territory of macroeconomics, which is basically looking at economics on a very large scale. A country like the US has a pretty good standard of living, which takes into account wealth and access to goods and services. For example, an average middle-class US citizen probably has a house, a car, a job, and access to a plethora of goods and services that can be purchased via the income received through that job. Now let's take into consideration a new country that I just formed, which is called the Together Areas of a Landform. This country only produces and exports stuffed animals. Yeah, and let's say that this country only exports one stuffed animal per day. The Together Areas of a Landform, TAL, has a horrible standard of living. Why? Because of productivity. Productivity is essentially the amounts of goods and services that a worker can create in a certain amount of time. If the workers in TAL are only making one stuffed animal per day, their efficiency is not as high as the workers in the USA. So they're probably not getting paid as much. This means that they have less money to buy other goods and services. Oh wait, TAL only produces one thing. So how do the citizens of TAL buy things such as food, building supplies for houses, and even cars? It has to be imported. However, it becomes extremely difficult to import things if you're only relying on the revenue brought in by exporting stuffed animals, and not a lot of them at that. Another way of measuring this would be GDP. GDP, or gross domestic product, is a measure of the monetary value of goods and services that a country produces. Let's say that TAL uses USD for currency. The GDP of TAL is $365 US. The GDP of the United States of America is 19.39 trillion United States dollars. Based on these facts, we can see that higher productivity equals higher standard of living and higher GDP. However, as a side note, just because a country has a great standard of living doesn't mean that everyone is fine and dandy. For example, people making minimum wage, or even below that, don't have as great a standard of living as people who are, say, upper class. Why? Because there's often a trade-off between efficiency and equity. Efficiency is basically getting the most out of the least. And equity is the idea of fairness, making sure that resources are spread out evenly amongst everyone. For example, it might be more efficient for a company to exploit low-class workers and pay them less than minimum wage to maximize their profits, but it's more equitable for them to make sure that their workers are getting at least paid a minimum wage, even if it's detrimental to their possible profits. Principle 9. Prices rise when the government prints too much money. Let's take an example here. Suppose the government of TNS prints its own currency, the owl, and releases 1,001 owl bills into circulation. Now let's say in that country of TNS there's a vendor who sells Hootie Hoo soda. Go Owls. And based on the supply and demand of the product, they price it at 2 owls. This is all fine and dandy and people are happy. Now, let's say that the government prints another 1,001 owl bills and releases them into circulation. Now, assuming that all of those 1,000 bills get distributed evenly, everyone now has double the original amount of money that they had. It should come at no surprise that Hootie Hoo soda increases their price from 2 owls to 4 owls. Why? Well, because giving everyone more money doesn't necessarily make everyone more wealthy. Instead, what it does is it devalues the currency. Where 1 owl was originally worth 1 owl, now that 1 owl is worth about half that because the amount of money in total doubled. This means that to make the same amount of relative owls as they were making before, they now have to double their price. This is called inflation, when there is an overall increase in the level of prices in the economy. Principle number 10. Society faces short-run trade-off between inflation and unemployment. Now, this is probably the most difficult principle to actually apply in the real world. So instead of doing it the traditional route, I'm going to explain it in a more rhythmic fashion. 10th principle of economics states, society faces short-run trade-off between inflation and unemployment. I regret doing this entire music video, but I gotta do it anyways. William Phillips in 1958 found correlation between inflation and unemployment rate. The correctness of the Phillips curve economists dispute, but these facts I am about to spit are hard to refute because inflation, it affects the whole nation. When the government prints too much dough, the amount of jobs might start to grow. Inflation, what in tarnation? Hey, put down your phone cause your mind's about to get blown. In relation to inflation, there's an obvious trend. More money in circulation means more money people spend. Let me explain. If I'm paid $3 and the sponge is $3, then I would buy the sponge for only $3. Now let's say the gov prints more money, so I'm paid $6 instead of $3. Now this would prompt me to go on a shopping spree. Cause now for doing the same job, I'm getting paid double, so this means I can buy 2 sponges, not just one, without any trouble. Now if everyone buys double the amount of sponges, this means the total supply of sponges plunges. Now if companies didn't respond to this, there would be less supplies, and so to meet that demand, the cost of products rise. So now instead of being able to use $6 to buy 2, they bump their price from 3 to 6, so now just 1 will have to do. And what this does is balance out supply with demand so that the economy doesn't get out of hand. Inflation, it affects the whole nation. When the government prints too much dough, the amount of jobs might start to grow. Inflation, next stop, econ station. Though most prices may rise, the economy can give us a surprise. Cause sometimes those prices, they get a little sticky, and simply what I mean is that they don't adjust quickly. Now sticky prices don't respond to the inflation, so they stay low, and this means that business is anything but slow. Now this is all assuming that inflation is unexpected, because that can allow for the unemployment rate to become affected. Since the price doesn't go up to prevent a drought, means the company needs to pump more products out. Because instead of adjusting price to make equilibrium, alright, to get to equilibrium with sticky prices, you have to shift supply to the right. Forcing the same amount of workers to make more is hard to endorse, which typically means that companies expand their workforce. And when companies expand their amount of employees, it can help alleviate unemployment unease. Because more people getting hired means less people unemployed, so unemployment rate falls down into the unforgiving void. Yeah, inflation, it affects the whole nation. When the government prints too much dough, the amount of jobs might start to grow. Inflation, it affects the whole nation. When the government prints too much dough, the amount of jobs might start to grow. Yeah. I regret all of my life decisions very much. Thank you for listening. Please give me a good grade.